Once upon a time, I made the mistake of letting people know that I could play Japanese RPGs and other games in their original language, and the result was what you'd expect. People kept clamoring, saying, "Oh well, you know the language. That's great. I love Japanese stuff. I'd love to know Japanese. I'd love to learn Japanese and be able to watch anime or play games in their original language. You gotta teach me." Everyone was saying that to me. You got to teach me Japanese. So eventually, I caved into the pressure and got excited about the prospect of teaching people Japanese because I love language and I love Japanese culture. And so, at a, not an insignificant amount of labor and research, I began to create a massive online resource to help people learn, which nobody watched, least of all the people who had explicitly requested that I do it. So at that point, I was pretty bitter, and I shelved the project for a very long time. And I'm just now ready to resurrect it, although I've come to the realization that not everybody really has the patience and discipline and desire, or maybe just the time, to learn in the rote way that I was teaching before, which was along the lines of a Khan Academy lesson, if you're familiar with Salman Khan and his channel. So we're going to try something pretty different, and this approach is going to have a much gentler learning curve, and frankly is going to be a lot more candy-coated than what we were doing with the Japanese for Gamers series. We're going to be playing Japanese language games and translating them as we go along. Now, it's important that we strike a balance between the pace at which we learn and the pace at which we progress through the game. So what I'll do is I'll teach one new word for every individual text window that comes up. That might sound like it's going to be really slow, but games like this don't use a particularly large vocabulary, and by the time we reach the end of this Let's Play, you'll probably understand between 90% to 100% of any given conversation window. You don't need to know as many words to understand these sorts of games as you would if you were reading a newspaper, for example. The same terms keep coming up: sword, spell, wizard, knight, fighter, airship, crystal, monster, magic. These terms come up again and again. So by the time you learn them, you'll have not just the ability to understand all or nearly all of what the NPCs are saying by the end of the game, but you'll actually be equipped to navigate the menus and understand basic plot points of any RPG that has a medieval theme. And then, of course, if the series is successful, and who knows whether it will be, we could visit other RPGs that have more steampunk or science fiction themes, and then we'll learn that sort of appropriate vocabulary set as well. Kono, this. Kaze, wind. Umi, sea. Daichi, earth or ground, land, soil, can mean several things. This is a Chinese compound made of two characters. The character on the left is big, and you'll be seeing that a lot in different words. It's a very common prefix. And the one on the right is earth or soil. So when you have big soil, it means the earth or ground in a large expanse, or maybe in the superlative meaning, the whole ground, all the earth. Shikashi, however. Yo, world. You You might have noticed this one earlier in the same expression. Kono yo, this world. Nagai, long. Soshite, thus or thusly. Now don't worry, we're not going to translate all of the menus. That's a little bit too heavy for the first episode. So we're just going to look at the options that are available to you initially after going to the menu from the field. So from the top, we have Itemu, items, Maho, magic, Sobi, equipment, Status, status, Tairetsu, formation, Configu, configuration or config for short, and finally Seibu, save. Notice that Japanese does not have a V sound, so they approximate it by using B's. Seibu, save. Alright, now let's take a quick look at the battle options. First of all, you'll notice that it has three words that we've already covered. Maho, magic, item, and equipment, sobi. The two new ones at the top are tatakao, which means fight, and this can mean fight in terms of an attack, but it can also be used in abstract senses, like nations fighting, people arguing, or at loggerheads in some regard. But in this case, it just means fight with a melee weapon. Then at the bottom you have nigeru, to flee or run away. Corneria, the kingdom of Corneria or Cornelia. This is obviously a proper name for the country that we're in, and because the Japanese language rather infamously lacks an L sound, they will use an R for both R's and L's, and sometimes they'll mix and match them. There's really no way to tell without looking it up on the wiki or having an interview with the person who originally made the game. Oh, king. It's a pretty simple character. It should be easy to remember. If you come across more complicated characters as we go, don't try to rack your brain or make extensive notes. You'll see several simple characters that are easy to remember, and over time you'll notice that the more complicated characters are really just the simple characters mashed into each other. This is a grunt of surprise that this guard gives when he sees that we're carrying the crystals from the prophecy. So, what you're looking at, on the left is the katakana for mu, and on the right is a shrunken version of the katakana for tsu. Now, when you have a bite-sized version of the katakana for tsu, it doesn't make a sound of its own. Instead, it does the same thing that the letter H does in Western onomatopoeia. In other words, one H at the end of a or o indicates the sound is a bit cut off, whereas a long series of H's can indicate that the sound trails off. So this goes from mu to m, and that shrunken su sort of pinches that vowel sound at the end of the mu syllable. Cornelia no Shiro, the Castle of Cornelia. If you see that, if you see the kana no acting as a particle, x no y, when you translate it in English, it becomes y of x. So Cornelia no Shiro, Shiro is castle, becomes castle of Cornelia. There's a wide variety of different uses of this no particle, so we need to. It's a good thing that we learned that early on. Kokuo, king. You should recognize the character for king. This is just another word, a little bit more fancy for the same thing, kokuo. Koku is the character for country, and o is king. It combines into one word and means the king of the country, which might seem a little redundant, and it probably is. It's just a different way of saying the same thing. Rukhan, Lukhan, a proper name that refers to the prophet who foretold the coming of the warriors of light. And here again, we have a chance to bemoan the lack of a letter L in the Japanese language because the translation Rukhan and Lukhan are equally valid, and we'd have no way of knowing if it weren't for the localization, the wikis, and so forth. Daijin, High Minister. The character on the left will be familiar to you. It's the big character, pronounced Dai. And to the right, you have Jin, which is a government employee, particularly a minister or some sort of secretary, something along those lines. So, big minister just means minister, but a particularly important one, Daijin. Daga, the king shoots back. He's stepping on his minister's toes a little bit. They're having a disagreement. Daga means but, and it's just written out in Kana. Kuristaru, crystal. Waga, my. This is an expression normally used by old men and nobody else. Kuni, country. You'll probably recognize this from earlier on. We had the king himself is called the Kokuo, and that's using the Chinese derivative reading of this character. This is what's considered the native Japanese reading of the same character when it stands by itself and isn't part of a compound. So you have kuni for country, nation, and it's in the sentence, it's the prime minister speaking, the daijin, and he says, kono kuni, this country. Za, seat. Now, take note of the fact that even though this is the first video, and we're just accepting the first quest, we already know most of the sentence. Kono, this, Corneria, Cornelia, or Corneria, no kokuo, no za. So this is a compound version of what we saw earlier with that genitive expression, the no-based expressions. Just as x no y is y of x, so is x no y no z equal to z of y of x. Strictly speaking, there's no hard limit to the number of expressions that you could stack this way. So kono koneria no kokuo no za translates literally as the seat of, the king of this Corneria, or a more natural sounding translation would be the throne of this land of Corneria. Yatsu, that guy. This grammatically is equivalent to he or him, but it's an abusive term indicating hatred, disdain, or irritation with the person you're talking about. So in this case, they're talking about Garland, the knight that we're going to have to go north and defeat. And since he's kidnapped the princess, the prime minister and the king aren't exactly his biggest fans at the moment, so they refer to him as Yatsu, that guy. Ware ware, we. A couple things to take note of. First of all, the character to the left is going to be familiar to you. It was used earlier as part of waga, but now it's different and it says ware. The other thing is the character on the right is neither truly a kanji nor truly a kana. Instead, it's a symbol, and what it indicates is that it's a duplicate of whatever came before it. So when you see ware plus that symbol, it's ware ware. This text begins with a word we already know, yatsu, and that means he with derogatory connotations. The next word is a particle pronounced wa. It uses the kana for ha, ha, but it's pronounced wa, wa, when used in this fashion. Now, it's a grammatically required particle in Japanese, but it has no literal translation in English, so it's often left out. Sonatara, you all. Sonata is an archaic and very formal way of saying you, and ra at the end is a plural suffix. So sonata is you, sonatara, you all. Tairiku, continent. Here's our old friend, the kanji for big, but you'll notice that whereas it was dai in the first two instances, now it's tai. So again, you see that there's differences in readings. Sometimes they're subtle, sometimes they're major. So tairiku, the character on the right means it has a variety of meanings, but it usually means a mound or a pile of dirt or an expanse of land. So a large heap of land, a large mound of land, is a continent in their reasoning process. Tairiku, continent. Sarah, Sarah. Hikari, light. This is just simple. The entire word's baked into a single kanji, and it's a native Japanese reading. And they're talking about the warriors of light, so hikari is light. Garando, garland. Tanamu. Tanamu is a verb meaning to make a request or to implore someone or even to beg someone, depending on how you look at it. This is the king, humbling himself in front of the warriors because he cares about his daughter. He says, Tanamu, with an exclamation mark. He says, I urge you, or even I beg of you, to save my daughter. So that'll do it for today. Like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. This is a pretty painless way to learn some pretty difficult subject matter that a lot of people allege they have an interest in. But if nobody watches, then I have no reason to continue. So help spread the word. I really appreciate it. It needs to find its audience, and that's not going to be an easy thing. Thanks.